Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Chris Adams. I'm the Online Community Manager for ModernAnalyst.com, the premier online community for business analysts. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Build the Foundation for Sound Data Science Through Effective Data Preparation. Today's featured speakers are Julie Hyman and Michael Michelizzi. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to Michael to get us started.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name again is Michael Michelizzi, and I am the Product Marketing Manager here with Dell Software, and I'm responsible for our business intelligence tools, products such as Toad Datapoint and Toad Intelligence Central. And our presenter today is Julie Hyman. She's a product manager for these same tools, and Julie and I work very closely together on these products. Today, Julie is going to be taking us through a brief PowerPoint presentation, sharing some slides with you about data preparation and the importance of preparing your data effectively. And then she'll take you through a short demonstration of our solution to show you how you can build the foundation for sound data science through more effectively preparing your data. We have an hour for the presentation today. We will be taking questions at the end of the session, but feel free to go ahead and post questions in the Q&A window, and we'll be monitoring those as we go through the presentation. If they have some technical questions that we need to answer, I'll be interrupting Julie so we can kind of weave those in throughout the presentation as they come up. So again, thanks everybody for attending, and Julie, let's go ahead and get it started.
Thanks, Michael. Again, my name is Julie Hyman, and I'm a product manager here at Dell Software. And I'm excited to talk to you about data preparation today. We've been doing data preparation with some of the tools within the Dell Software portfolio for a while, but it's really only recently that I think it's gotten this sort of publicity that it truly deserves as an important, if not critical, part of good data science. People have been talking about data science and data scientists for a couple of years now. Certainly at all of the events and shows I go to, it's a big topic, and lots of articles. But really, you can't have good data science without good data prep. It's just not possible. It's the same old sort of garbage in, garbage out philosophy that we all know from nearly every area of our life. And I think that's coming to the forefront right now over the last, I think, year and a half, as people actually have moved data science from sort of hype cycles where they're talking about doing it to actual practical cycles where they're actually attempting it. They're finding out, just like this quote that I have here from Steve Lohr, I have the citation below from the New York Times, is that really data prep is taking from 50 to 80% of the time it takes to do data science. It's all about that, what he calls here, mundane labor of collecting and preparing the digital data before it can be explored. It's also called, data preparation is also known as data wrangling or data janitor duties. There's all sorts of terms, but it's all referring to getting the data ready to do the good science on. So I wanted to just start off with, let's just look at what a flow of data science looks like, and then we can isolate which parts of this flow are really about the data prep. So you have the data acquisition all the way over here on the left, and this is about connectivity, right? Being able to connect to all the different layers that you want to, that are holding all the data that you've got. And this is really, I think, what's driving so much of this conversation about data science and data prep is all of this data we now have, right? The big data explosion and the growth of data. Everybody is now very much aware of the amount and the depth of data that they have and the breadth, and so they're trying to do things with it. And so the acquisition phase comes first. You have to know where your data lives and what data you've got, and try to figure out a way to connect to it. Second stage is, now that you've got all that data connected, you got to integrate and blend it. Very few folks are very lucky enough to have all of their data sort of sitting in one pot from the get-go. So there has to be an integration blending stage, and we'll talk more throughout this whole presentation about what the difference between integration and blending is. But at the end of the day, what you want to do is stack and unstack and move data together so that you have a single data set that you're running the science against. Once you've got it integrated and blended, or as part of that, you've got to cleanse it, you've got to transform it. And to do that, you need to profile it, right? So you need to understand what's in the data, what it consists of, what needs to be added to it, what needs to be cleaned out of it. And so all of those steps have to happen before you can get to the analyze phase. And so you've got the analyzation phase, and that's really where people start talking about the statistician and the data scientist and all those sort of deep different models that you can use. But really, the analyze phase could be something as simple as just traditional reporting and graphs and charts. The rise of products like Tableau, Qlik has been around forever, but the rise of that in people's consciousness is all about graphing and charting. Maybe not some of that deep analysis is not the first thing you think of when you think of those products. So the analyze phase can start with just basic reporting and go all the way to those predictive and advanced analytics that everyone talks about and everyone wants to get their hands on. And then there's one last phase, which sometimes it gets talked about and sometimes it doesn't. I think it's important, and I think over the next few years, you're going to see more and more about this decision phase kind of popping out. And this is about, after you've done the analysis, it's sharing that analysis aspect of data, right? You've done all of this prep work, and you've done this analysis, and it's given you great insight. And so I think what you're going to see more and more is this talk about how do you tell the story with data. What expertise do you need to have? What qualities do you need to have to tell a good data story? Because you don't have to put all of this effort in data and then just plunk down some graphs and charts in front of people. So just a little insight, or at least I think where it's going to go after we start talking about prep and we've got that down and we're doing the analysis, it's going to be that storytelling. So what I wanted to call out here is when we talk about data prep, we're talking about these first three pieces, really: acquisition, integration and blending, and profiling, cleansing, and transforming. And that, everything's spread out nice and even on this workflow chart, but really 80 to 90% of the effort involved in the analysis is all in this sort of heavy lifting part of the process: acquiring, integrating, and cleansing it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's talk a little bit about who does data prep and how that's changing in the market, right? So the traditional approach, which I've put here, is that the typical user, so 5 years ago, who was doing data prep to get to good data science? It was IT developers or data scientists. And how are they doing it? They were writing code, right? They're doing scripting. They had some menu graphical capabilities and some deep tools, but mostly they were writing code. And that code might be SAS code, it might be coding with ETL products, but it was a language that you had to learn to be able to do this, and it typically was that deep technical person. Data integration was all about physical migration, right, to cubes and marts and warehouses and all of these infrastructure pieces that we've been investing in so long. The data types were all the ones that we've been dealing with traditionally, the structured data types, right, moving things from relational databases into data warehouses or reporting cubes. And as a result of all of this, right, the amount of skill set needed to involved, the amount of physical hardware involved, it was very rigid and very in advance. Okay, so if you wanted to have data prepped and ready for analysis, that was something that took, a huge cycle of time. You had to define up front what all of your requirements were because there was such an investment to get them met. And so it was very difficult to do. What we're moving into now, and we've moved into really, is the self-service approach. Okay, so now we're changing who's doing data prep. We're taking those high resources, those high demand resources of developers and data scientists, and they're focusing either on the back end infrastructure with the developers or on the front end analysis or the downstream analysis, and we're opening up this data prep and cleansing to data analysts and business analysts. So because of that, we have to give them a user experience that doesn't involve coding, right? The tools that they use to do this data prep need to be as easy to pick up as Excel. Some people think that's not so easy, but it's something we've all adapted to and learned, and it's something that you can spend a little time using, and it comes intuitively to you. Data integration has moved. There's certainly still the physical migration happening, right? There's all that infrastructure we've invested in. There's all those ETL processes. But now we're demanding easy data mashup. So I want to mash up these two pieces of data. I want to blend them. Maybe that's not what I want in the long run, but I want to try it out. I want to have a sandbox where I can do this easy data mashup. And again, I want to do it without having to initiate a huge ETL process with an ETL developer or have a coder as well. Okay, so it has to be an easy mashup solution. The data types, I'm sure you've heard lots of conversation. They are many, they are varied. People are talking about all sorts of data types now. People are excited about the data they've been collecting, and they want to make it useful. Collection is interesting, but it's not interesting until the data becomes useful, and so that's what they want to do with that data. And this whole self-service approach is to try to get us to this ad hoc, iterative process. The whole world is moving agile, at least the world of IT, where we want to do things, we want to see results quickly, and we want to be able to iterate through those results to get what we want, as opposed to waterfall, which is the way it used to be approached, where you sit down at the very beginning and try to figure out every single requirement you're going to have, every single question you're going to want to have answered, and when you're done with that, you move it on to the next step. We've all tried that, and it's very difficult, very slow, very unruly. What we want to do now is get some ideas, try them out, take what works, move it forward, drop what doesn't work, and get that ad hoc iterative process. So this approach to self-service data prep needs new tools, right? Especially since we're going to rely on the tools to do a lot of the work for us, and we're not having someone actually developing or coding new tools along the way as we did in the past. So with new tools and new people involved in the whole process, right, we just talked about how a data scientist used to curate this process maybe from beginning to end, figure out how to do the connectivity, figure out all the cleansing and blending, maybe working with developers, maybe writing code, writing their own R code, or doing everything all the way to the end, right, the actual data science part. Now we've got other people involved in the process. We've got data analysts and business analysts, and there's more handoffs. So some key concepts we want to focus on to make this all work. The first one is to really embrace the idea of iterative. All data prep should be iterative. I can't think of a single instance in my experience where everybody at the very beginning knew all of the questions they wanted answered, knew the state of the data exactly before they initiated a data prep, data science project. People know what they know, but the data, at the end of the day, the data is what holds the truth about the quality of the data. People have impressions about how rich their data is, how robust, the quality of it, but it's not until you really, lift up the covers and get deep down, elbow deep inside the data that you actually understand the quality of the data that's there. There's probably a lot of data myth in organizations until you actually are working deep with the data. And then no matter how much you've been thinking about the questions that you want answered, no matter how much you've had executive conversations, again, there's no conversation I've ever had about data where looking at an end result, even a fantastic end result, doesn't spur or spawn more questions. Like, this is fantastic information, Julie. I can't believe we were able to put this together. Do we know if we could look at it regionally? Right? Do we know what the influencing factors of this? It would be interesting to see, what the gender roles of our customers are that influence this action. So all data science, and especially the good data science, actually spurs the imagination of the consumer, so they're asking more questions. So all of that means that we need to be able to grab all of that information about the data, its state, its cleanliness, and react to it, and we need to be able to look at those questions that are being asked at the end and react to it as well. So we need short life cycles and iterative process with data prep. And if you're designing a data prep solution that you feel isn't iterative, where it might be 3 months to beginning to end whenever a new requirement comes in, I highly suggest that you go back and revisit that and do what you can to make it more agile. Right, to make it more iterative, because nothing can slow down or disappoint as much as a process that takes too long. The second concept here is knowing the business context of the data. Okay, so we've talked about how traditionally this whole process from connectivity through the presentation at the end might have been done by, let's say, 1 or 2 stakeholders, an IT developer or an IT developer team teamed up with a data scientist or a couple of data scientists. Now that we're extending the amount of players within the whole process, capturing the business context of the data and understanding the business context of the data is key to make this all work. So what I mean by that is it's not enough to ask somebody, please grab my data from SQL Server, I need these 3 tables, and grab my data from Oracle, match them up, and give me the result set. Because what you'll get at the end of the day is exactly that. You'll get the literal interpretation of what you asked. And if the data doesn't match right, or let's say the percentage of matches that you had between the keys between those 2 systems is at 20%, you'll get 20% of data. And you'll end up going back to that user and saying, you know, why isn't this data more rich? Explain this to me. When all of that probably could have been stopped at the beginning or dealt with at the beginning if that user that's putting the data together understands the business reasons why you want to do this, right? They're the ones that are going to be elbow deep in that data. And so it's really important to know the business reasons of why you put things together. And this should be pretty intuitive concept as well, right? You know that your best presentations, your best work is done when you have an understanding of why people want the outcome that they're asking from you, not just the specifics about what that outcome looks like, but why they want it. Because then you can bring your mind to bear at those times when you're in the middle of the process and something doesn't look right, or maybe something over here looks better. Okay? So make sure that when you're designing these processes that you capture the objectives, right? And you're actually educating everybody along the flow with those objectives. In the same vein, you want to engage the power of hypothesis. And so what I mean here is when you're talking to people who are doing your data prep, right, and you're setting them up to be effective in that role, a great way to really empower them is to give them some idea of what you think the data is going to tell you. So, hey, John, we need you to put this data together. It's coming from these 2 environments. We're trying to match our sales and marketing data to understand how our marketing spend is affecting our sales. And one of the key hypotheses that we think is true is that the more high touch the campaign is, the more effective it is from a sales motion. That's great information because as the user is now putting the data together, they have context for the data, but they can also test the data against the hypothesis. They can say, okay, let me just quickly graph this out and see if what they're saying is true. Now, it might be your hypothesis was right, it might be it was wrong, but if the data itself is wrong, it might show up when you're looking at that hypothesis. Again, you all may have instances where you've been looking at data or looking at a graph, whether it was produced by you or somebody else, and that graph told you something that you just felt did not meet your experience, right? Wow, it's very interesting. This graph is telling me that the majority of people who are buying this certain product are male. And that doesn't seem to make sense. My real-world knowledge, my everyday intuition tells me that seems odd. And there's probably been instances where you've come across that and you've questioned the data and you found that you were right. I know this happens to me quite often. When I question data and I say, you know what, that doesn't seem right to me, right? It's not hitting my intuition tells me that's wrong. One of 2 things are going to happen. One, I'm going to get deeper insight into the data that show me where my intuition was incorrect, right? Where it gives me more information about where my assumptions were off, and it educates me, and that's always a great thing because I'm taking that to the next process and the next project that I have. Or because I'm looking at that and I'm bringing all of my real-world intuition back into the data, I find out where there's an error in the process. Oh, we didn't account for this demographic. Oh, we didn't account for this data. Yeah, here we don't have any insight, so we're making some assumptions in the data. And maybe those assumptions are wrong. So it's not just letting them know the business context, hey, we need to know sales and marketing together and what it means, but give that person that's prepping the data something to test it against, right? Give them a hypothesis, again, just so that they could test the data and have some feeling about if the data's steering them in the right direction. And lastly, you got to demand more from our tool set. The product that I'm going to show you later in this presentation has been around for about 7 to 8 years. And it started off as sort of an ad hoc query tool and specifically aimed at data analysts and IT. And it's expanded since then, and we're going to talk about that. But one of the things that we've discovered is that these data analysts in IT who were doing some of this early data prep, you can look at it that way, right? They were doing ad hoc queries, filling demands from the business to see data. The tools that we were replacing for them were a cobbled together set of tools. So people doing their job were using Access, were using Excel, were grabbing free databases like MySQL or Maria, were putting them on the desktop, and they were cobbling together fairly complex scenarios to meet the needs of the business. And I think they did that because those data analysts were using a lot of tools that were free, or at least free to them, right? It was already on their desktop. They didn't have to ask for anything else. And so they cobbled together tools. And I think that's because a lot of this process, while it was needed, wasn't highly valued. And so those analysts weren't like DBAs or developers that could demand a tool set that met their job objective. They were seen as somebody, well, you can get the job done with what you got. But I think with an understanding of how important data science is to our business, how it can actually revolutionize how we do business, how it can give us an edge over the competition. So you take that and you marry that with this concept that 80 to 90% of the hard work in that data science and that beautiful dashboard or that key insight came from data prep. I think we have the right to demand better tools for our job. So we have the right to demand more from the tool set and not just cobble things together. If you think about how much Excel is used in your organization, I'm a big fan of Excel, but everybody uses it to access because it's right there, it's easy, and you don't have to ask for a specialized tool set. And some of the processes, some of the macros, some of the things that Excel is enabling are great, but we really should be demanding more from our tools so we're not doing all of the heavy lifting that we have to do when we're using tools that are developed for things other than what our process is. Right? Data prep is important. Data prep needs its own tool set.
Hey, Julie, this is Michael. You were talking earlier about some of the tools that people used when you first started looking at, what people were doing in our solution. Can you tell me what you see people are using nowadays? What other tools would people be using now?
Yeah, I can. So there's been a rise of this data prep market, right? And it's actually been first defined, I think, by Gartner this year as its own little space within big data. There's been a wisdom of crowd survey, so if you follow people like Howard Dresden in the market, this is the first year they've done it. But preceding this, there's been a lot of different changes to the market. So when you look at the tool set for data prep, it's going to come in the following categories. First of all, there's analytic tools out there. There's the tools that have already been developed like SAS and Statistica and others that are doing the actual data science. And Statistica is the Dell tool that does it. Those tools, because it's they're data science, they've developed out of necessity some data prep capabilities in them. And so you're going to see these data science tools, right, the actual analytics tools have some data prep. When you're looking at that tool set, keep in mind that their user is a data scientist, is typically who they're going for. So sometimes that data prep capability is two things. One, it's pretty complicated, and so because it's assuming the data scientist persona is the one that's using it. And two, it comes embedded in what's already an expensive tool. And so it's an expensive proposition. But you see analytics tools that have some data prep capabilities. On the other end, you see the rise of data visualization and graphics tools like Tableau and Qlik and others who are catering more toward a business user to do graphics and visualizations. And again, because all of that is based on how good the data is, they're expanding into the data prep market as well. So you see these data discovery, data visualization tools that have, out of necessity, put some data prep features in there. Usually don't see a breadth of data prep features there, but you see some key ones that have been requested by their users. So data visualization tools have some data prep in there. And just a comment on that, those tools are typically geared more for the business user because it's the business user that's driving graphics and visualizations. And so those data prep functionalities are a little easier to use. But again, they're tied to that visualization tool. You can't use Tableau Prep to get click dashboards, right? Not without having to build some sort of bridge. The third category is tools that are developed just for data prep. And there's a couple of ones that are new to the market. If you go out and search under data prep, you're going to see new ones that are developed just to meet this need. And they are usually met around big data. So you'll see if you did a search for big data, data prep tools, you'd see a couple come up. The biggest ones have just emerged in the market in the last 2 years. They're really new to the market. And they've sort of tied themselves to the big data proposition. Doesn't mean that they only do big data, but that's their focus. So there's one that's highly popular that, for example, assumes you've got a Hadoop cluster. So you've got those things that are specifically about data prep, which is great, but they're tied to sort of the big data movement. So if you've got a lot of transactional data, if you've got on-prem data, some of these are even cloud propositions, they might not quite work for you. And the last, which is where we fall, I feel, Dell, is where you have these ad hoc query tools that are really been tools for data analysts, and those tools have expanded into what data analysts are doing today and business analysts are doing, which is data preparation. So they've always been sort of tool sets helping people query and gather data, and they've expanded it so that not only can you query and gather data, but you can profile it and prep it and share it with others. So those are sort of the 4 categories. So we're going to talk about 5 areas to pay particular attention to when you're doing data prep, and I'm just going to go through a single concept on kind of each one of these. We'll go through it briefly because I do want to be able to get to a demo and at least show you some of this in action. Even if it's not the tool that you end up using, I think it's helpful to see an actual tool working with data to get a real idea of what I'm talking about rather than looking at PowerPoint. So we'll look at connectivity, integration and blending, profiling, transformation and cleansing, sharing the end result, and creating a repeatable process. So just really quickly, I know when it comes to integration and blending, there's a lot of terms and it gets very confusing. ETL, virtualization, federalization, is there a difference between integration and blending? I wanted just to give you a quick definition to help you kind of navigate the market. So data integration, when you think about data integration, you should think of the entire process from soup to nuts, right? It's a series of processes to bring data together. Part of that process might be blending, right? So that's joining data from different sources. Data integration doesn't have to include blending. It could just be integrating data from a single source, so integrating tables, different tables from a single source. But typically, today you're going to want to blend data and join them from other sources. Okay, so data integration is the whole process to combine data. Data blending is a specific part of that where you're joining data from different sources. ETL is about extract, transfer, and load, and this has been around forever. And though this is about data movement, that part of your data integration process is going to be moving data so that it lives in the same environment, so you're not blending data from different sources, right? Or you're doing it as part of your ETL process, but not part of your analysis, right? So this is very physical. You literally have to have a way to extract the data. You have to transfer it, and part of that transferring is transforming it, right, to fit into a new model, and then loading it. In ETL, that's as relational, typically relational databases or data warehouses. Data virtualization is a way to describe a method where the end user, right, the person doing the analysis, isn't aware of all of the details and the technical requirements of that data before it gets to them. You've given them a virtual layer where they can reach in and grab the data they need without knowing that it's sourced from 3 systems and part of it came through an ETL and other parts of it were blended and transformed, right? You've kind of hid that from the end user and you've created a data virtualization layer where they can just reach in and grab the data without having to have that deep knowledge about where it came from. And data federation is a kind of data virtualization, but it's where the data is actually stored. So a lot of times you'll have a data virtualization environment that is completely virtual. So when someone requests the data from that environment, it literally goes out to the individual pieces and grabs it at runtime. Or you might have a data federation environment where the data is moved and blended and everything done to it beforehand, and then someone goes into that data virtualization layer. They still don't know the back end or need to know the back end, but they're reaching into a storage of data as opposed to creating a virtual reach out to the back end. So just some terms to kind of keep in mind, because they'll get thrown around quite a lot. And a lot of times there's people in the industry that use these interchangeably. I don't think people stick to these very rigidly, but it's good in your mind to know, if you have a process that you're putting in place, what your goal is, right? We want to do more blending than ETL kind of thing, more virtualization than federation kind of thing. Okay, I'll go through these quickly. Data profiling is absolutely key. Right? A lot of times people will blend data without stopping and taking a look at how that blended data, or how those data sources they're reaching out to, what the quality of the data is in there. You have to profile your data, right? As that data prep person, you're not just carrying out orders, initiated from the data scientist. You are actually looking at that data and trying to give them good quality data that meets their business needs, and maybe even has been tested against their hypothesis before handing it back to them, and data profiling is an important part of that. Transformation and cleansing, you shouldn't have to be a developer to do this, right? UI is key. This needs to be easy. Everything you do in data transformation cleansing should be reusable and well documented, right? You shouldn't have to continually push that stone up the hill, right? You should be able to set up a library for yourself so that you're constantly producing good quality work. The tools should help you. They should suggest changes, right? And a lot of this stuff is looking at things like how many nulls or what data types there are, and the code can do that. You shouldn't have to do all of it. And you want to look for some of the key challenges that are really hard to overcome, like duplicates, and you want to look for tools that really can dive deep in those areas, right, and have advanced features like sounds like and fuzzy matches and things like that. Otherwise, you'll be doing it by hand. Sharing, this is really critical, because I think it's important when you're looking at a process or developing a process that you ask the question, okay, once I have good data, how am I going to share that back out with my environment, right? Is it going to be, I'm going to put all this hard work and have all these great tools, and at the end of the day I'm sending out Excel spreadsheets which are not secure, it doesn't scale? Or I'm going to do all this hard work and I've actually empowered my end users to do this work themselves, but they have to write it back out to a database, which means I have to involve IT, which slows down my process and slows down my ability to change quickly. So you want to look at this. How am I getting that data back out to the users? And it needs to meet all those same requirements that you had before. It needs to be easy. It needs to be iterative. You need to accept change well. So just keep that in mind. There's lots of options out there for this now. And then automation, right? At the end of the day, you want to take the stuff that you've learned and the processes that you've put together, and you want to automate it so that your people can move on to the next challenge and aren't just simply initiating known processes each and every day, right? They're not coming in every day and running the same reports or running through the same steps, right? You want to learn the steps, and then you want to go ahead and automate those and move on to the next problem. Okay, so having said all that, let me just talk briefly about Toad Datapoint, and then I'll show it to you. Toad Datapoint is a product that's been around at Dell for quite a while. It was originally came out of our Toad for Oracle product line, so it was something that had a lot of query capabilities that our Toad for Oracle product has, which is really well known in IT. But now it can do it against any kind of database, SQL Server, Sybase, Teradata, Netezza, right? So we expanded its reach. It started being adopted by analysts, and they became our target market, data analysts specifically, analysts that live in IT. And so we started putting a lot more functionality about what that data analyst wanted to do, including data integration, the ability to join data easily through the UI. The ability to prep the data, the ability to share the data. And what we find today is that really 25% of our audience don't live in IT at all. 25% of our current user base are living out in the business and are business users. So we expand our persona to not just be someone we know is coming from IT and maybe has more of an IT background, but really just an average everyday business user that has some knowledge of databases and some knowledge of what they want to do. So that's our tool. It works in an ecosystem, and I'll describe it briefly here, and then I'll show it in the product. It's a desktop tool, so all these little toads at the bottom here symbolize different desktops. Each user is empowered to do all of this integration and accessing and preparing. Each user has their own automation engine. But we also have a product that lives on the server, and it's called Toad Intelligence Central, and it can take all of the work from these individual siloed users and bring them together in a collaborative environment. So these users can publish data sets or queries or virtual federation, virtual data or federated data, right? So all of those terms I used before can put it into the shared environment. This shared environment can also be reached into and used by other tools like our own Dell Statistica or tools that we just have relationships with and partnerships with like Tableau or Click or any third-party tool that has basic ODBC access. So that enables our sharing. So you have the individuals empowered to do the work, and then you have a collaborative platform where they can share, and they can also offload some of their responsibilities. There's an automation engine. They can set up the automation on their desktop and then just publish it out to that server and let the server take responsibility from that point forward. So that's the Toad Intelligence Central piece of it. It's really there to enable these individual users to share across a platform together. So let me get into the demo, and I'll show you some key screens in Datapoint. You can always download a free trial of Datapoint. It's a 30-day trial. We can certainly extend that for anybody who wants further trial. Let me show you really quickly where to go get the trial. Toadworld.com is the best place. You can also get there from Dell.com or software.dell.com. But I love showing people Toad World because we have a very vibrant community out here with lots of users who are sharing. And so you come in here to toadworld.com, go to a product. There's our Datapoint product. And from here you have access to tons of resources. You have access to videos that we put together, blogs, Idea Pond where you can ask for new features. Here's where you get the trial right here. And then we also have a really rich forum. Our developers are out here daily working with our users directly. So you can work with our developers directly. We love to have that conversation constantly between the people writing the code and the people using the app. So that's all out here. So this is a great environment. So this is where you can go download the trial. And then from there, let me just jump into the app. And I'm just going to show you some key screens so you get an idea. So this is Toad Datapoint. It sits on a desktop. The first thing about this UI that you should know is over here on the left-hand side, this is all of your connectivity points. So here's all the data sources that you can connect to, and we have a big list of data sources that we support, and it gets bigger every release. We go from just files like Access, Excel, and just comma-separated values, to the basic relational databases, all the big players here, plus a generic ODBC connection if you're doing other databases, like I have some using FilePro still and using it that way. Then we've got some business intelligence sources. So if you want to go into, you have an Oracle BI semantic layer, you can key into that. Salesforce, SharePoint, if you've got SAP Business Object Queries, you can access that as well. And down here, lastly, we've got our NoSQL sources, right? Amazon Dynamo and Simple, Cassandra, HBase Hive, Mongo, all of them are here. So again, we're expanding this all the time. Always happy to hear about new connections users want us to add to this list. But you have them all here. And then you can create any amount of connections out here. Here's all the Excel spreadsheets I connect to on a routine basis, MongoDBs and MySQLDBs, some generic ODBC. So this is my library of all the connections that I've made. It's easy to export this library and share it with others, import others' shared libraries, so you can do this. I can do it individually, or I could do it through that shared Intelligence Central platform as well.
Hey, Julie, this is Michael.
Sure.
Hey, there's a question from the audience. Does this tool have connectors to pull Google Analytics data?
Yeah, we actually do. So Google Analytics is one of our connectors here. It's very simple to set up, and you can write queries against it. So some of the key features of our connectivity list is, one, once you've brought everything in here, it's all SQL compliant. So I'm writing SQL against standard query language against Excel, against Google Analytics, against Salesforce, and it's also very easy to match data up and do data integration as well. So let me give you some quick screens here. Through this tool, you can diagram out a database. So here I've just dragged some tables. This is my SQL Server connection I've got running right here. My sales production. I've got some tables I've dragged out here. It's exposed some relationships. I can also create relationships if there's none exposed on the back end. So I could just drag and drop and create a relationship. It doesn't create it on the back end for anybody else, but it documents it on my front end. And so from now on, I will have this relationship between the tables as well here. Oops. That's not a good one because those two things don't match. Okay, I can remove it. I've also got ability to see some insight into this join data. So if I've got my orders here are attaching to my contacts, I can do a quick click here and then see what is the relationship. I've got, let me see here, a number of values in contacts, also in orders is 1,000, but I've got also a lot more orders than contacts, a lot more less contacts than orders. So you can see the match here. And I can just move and get Venn diagrams between my contacts and my addresses. So you get to interrogate just through a click all the relationships. Now I've built a relationship here with a single source, but you could build a relationship that's multi-sourced as well. So you can take this relationship and send it to a query, and it will actually take you into a visual query builder and preserve those relationships. I'm going to look really quickly at a cross query that I built here just to give you a range of the power that we have. So this is a single query that's going against an Excel spreadsheet where I've got some warehouse data. It's going against Cassandra, which is where I'm containing all of my individual items that are attached to an order, whereas the order data and the contact data is a business objects query. So I can join all of this data together just through dragging and dropping through key fields, and then I can pick out the fields I want to return in the query. I have where clauses and aggregates. If I don't like working in this visual environment, I could write the query directly or start the query in the visual environment and then send it over to an editor to finish it out here. And then this is my result set. Once I've got my result set, there's tons of things I can do with it. First of all, I can profile the results very quickly. This is just a single tab that gives me 1,000 rows, just the first 1,000 rows. It gives me an idea of what is in this result set, right? So I can see, for example, although I have an actual ship date, it is not populated. There's 1,000 rows that are null within this data. I can see what my duplicates are, my missing, my nulls, top patterns. I can discover domains of the data. This is formatted like an email address and top patterns there. And then from here I can move to full profiling. So I can go from here and I can say I want to do all rows or the first whatever number of rows or random sampling of rows and pick the kind of profiling I want to do. I'll just keep with this 1,000 and profile this data. And this will open up a profiling screen where I can dive as deep as I want into the data, right? So I can look at things like, here's all that same information I saw on the other screen, but I can also see it graphically here, sort it by nulls, take a look at this fields and see what I want to do with it. I can isolate the data itself by clicking here and then pulling up and saying, okay, these are the ones that have a null in that column. I can move through this data. I can send this to a report. I can automate this to happen when I'm not around. There's lots of different things I can do with it. You can look at statistics on all of the data, frequencies and patterns and language, and you can also do duplicates, right? And you can choose how you want to find your duplicates, whether you want to use profiling samples or all rows, exact, case-insensitive, fuzzy comparisons, date and time comparisons, number comparisons, and then you can choose what you want to do with the duplicates as well, whether you want to create a data set that has removed, or left, I should say, only one of the duplicated rows, or you want to export all of the rows that are duplicated out to another source to be dealt with at a different time. There's lots of different things you can do here in the profiling. All of the profiling, though, is really just to get you to a case where you're actually doing something with the data. So going back to my editor here, I can go back and send this to transformation and cleanse. And so sending this to transformation and cleanse means that now I'm going to start building actions I want to take against the data. So I've got, here's all of the data here. It's, again, it's the first 1,000 rows, although I could pull all the rows in if I wanted to. And I can choose what to do. I can choose to, for example, looking at this region, and these are null. There's some null data in here. I can choose I want to replace this. It's actually got the word null in here. I want to go ahead and do a replace. Let's replace the word null with the word empty, something simple. Apply that rule. And then building a set of steps that I can save out here and use over and over again. I have lots of different features and functions I can choose to do this with. And when I build these steps, I can also add this to a library and start creating a library of steps that I can actually just use over and over again, continuing to apply things, right, to my data set. And as I'm applying it, it's going to actually try it out here within my transformation and cleanse engine. This is all great, so I can see it in action, but at the end, I can choose to publish the results or automate the whole process. Automating the process, let me save this really quickly. I know I'm running through these screens very quickly, but I wanted you to get an idea of what you should expect a tool to do for you. Of course, that's going to happen. There's never been a demo I've gone through where I haven't had something like that happen. But let me kind of talk for a second about what you can do with the data once you've got to the result set and you've put together your transformation and cleanse routines. You can publish this. So you can automate this and you can publish that whole automation, or you can run it from your desktop and publish the whole data set. And this is what I was talking about with Intelligence Central. So you can connect up to any Intelligence Central installation in your environment and then choose what you want to do. So for example, on this cross query that I have here, in my sales production database, I can choose to go ahead and publish just a single result set out to Intelligence Central. Let me see if I can find a result set here that's going to come back for me. So I'll just talk you through it. So you can choose to publish a result set out to Intelligence Central. And when you do that, you have a choice, right? And you want to have that flexibility in any tool set that you choose. You want to be able to say, I want to publish this data as data, meaning I just want to get it out there so other people can consume it. I want to publish this data as refreshing data. So you're publishing out your data and you're giving your server, whatever that environment is, all of the rules and information about how to refresh that data at a regular rate, right, a regular interval. I want to make this available to my users, and I want to know that they're always working with data that has a latency of 1 day, that's always being refreshed in the evening. And you want to be able to move that refresh to a time that makes sense for your production systems if that's what you're reaching into. Or you want to be able to create that true data virtualization layer where you're not actually storing the data in a storage and making that available to your user. What you're storing is the connectivity information. So the user thinks that they're grabbing data, but what they're really doing is they're initiating a process behind the scenes that's grabbing the data real time from the environments, applying the transformation rules that you've put in place, and then providing that data to them. So you want, whatever you choose, you want to be able to have that flexibility. I would encourage you to stay away from tools that insist upon you ETLing data, putting data movement in place, that would insist upon you doing data marts. I think data marts can be very helpful, right? Having these data storage, these data federation layers close to users, but you want to be able to choose between all three of those things, right? You want to choose between doing ETL when it makes sense, doing data federation when it makes sense, and doing data virtualization when it makes sense.
Hey,
so you have all three of those environments.
Sure. Sorry, Julie. There's a question from James. He's asking, when you do something like replace all nulls with the word empty, does it write the SQL code to do that?
It does. Within our tool, it does. It doesn't always do that with tools, and that's a good thing to bring up. When you're within our tool, you always have the ability to get to the SQL if SQL is available. So for example, in this case, I haven't initiated any rule that isn't SQL friendly. Now there are regular expressions and different things that you can initiate to do deeper cleansing. You know, it makes SQL unusable, right? It's not SQL friendly. But if you're doing rules like replacing or concatenating or pulling fields apart, different things like that. These are all very SQL-friendly rules, and so we always will give you the SQL that you can run and then store and rerun anywhere you want. And with that, I do want to leave time for questions.
I have a couple more. I have a couple more for you, Julie, if I can.
Absolutely.
So Jeffrey's asking if they buy Toad for the Toad for Datapoint for their business analysts, how do we get data if the source is from different sources such as Cognos, Oracle, or Excel? And I think you showed that earlier.
I did. So you can get to it from anywhere. And then also things like, so I'll show you my personal, like I have an ODB, this is actually the data point that I use daily to run my own analysis. And so things like Oracle, I'm using just an Oracle instance internally, and I have a login to the web portal of Oracle BI. And if I can log into the web, I can log in through Datapoint. Similarly, this is a Salesforce instance that I use, this Dell Software, mysalesforce.com, and I'm actually using my corporate credentials here. So it's using Active Directory. I don't have to log in at all. I just tell it to use my corporate credentials. So you can actually get, as long as you have access to that system, you can get to it from Datapoint as long as you have a login and username that's valid within that environment. You can get to it within Datapoint. And again, once you can get to it, you can do all of the things that I've been talking about. You can query it, diagram it, profile it, blend it, publish it. You have all of that access to you.
And another question, Julie, from Catherine Love. Is there an option for a terminal server for handling the automated jobs?
We don't have a terminal server. That's not how we use it. What we do have is the ability to publish all of that automation that you develop on your desktop into Intelligence Central. So you can publish it into the Intelligence Central environment and schedule it within that environment. And that Intelligence Central has the same automation engine that you have on your desktop. It's just empowered for, multi-tenant, so to speak. It's empowered for many users to use it. You can set up what the system account you want using it is on that server. So you can take all your automation jobs that you've done and push them up there and let Intelligence Central run them. And then there's also a management window where you can see and manage all that stuff that's happening.
Thanks, Julie. I have another question. This is from Vipul about hiding confidential information. He asks, do we have a mechanism to hide certain data fields from common data source while pulling data from data servers and published on the central server? Their organization has certain confidential information which they need to hide while analyzing data.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Right now we don't have a masking feature where you can pull that data out but obfuscate it. We do have some things that help in this area, though, and I'll give you a couple of real-world examples. We have this one user who uses Datapoint. He works for the U.S. Air Force Academy, and data that he has in different sources is actually keyed together by Social Security number. And using Datapoint, before Datapoint, he had to pull both data sets locally, which means pulling all that Social Security number locally, blending it together, and then producing a data set that didn't have the social. But now with Datapoint, he can create that relationship on the back end and only pull the data that he wants to actually report on. He can key off of social, but he doesn't need to show that in the data set. And that's true both on Datapoint and Intelligence Central. If the secure data is your key, you can use those keys without actually pulling those fields. One other thing on security, when you publish and share data through Intelligence Central, you are choosing who you share that data with. And there's actually 2 levels of security that we support there. It's not on a column-by-column basis, which I think would be the specific answer to your question, but it is on a data set basis. One is you choose who you want to share it with in Intelligence Central. So if they're not shared with me, I cannot see that data. And Intelligence Central is fully Active Directory compliant, so I'm logging in and I'm not seeing what I shouldn't see. 2, if it's a data virtualization layer, right, where what I'm really just presenting is like a semantic layer to the users and it reaches into the back end, I can insist that the users qualify who they are as they go to get the data. So if the data is pulling from Salesforce and an Oracle Business Intelligence environment, when they go to consume that object that I've shared with them, they have to put in their credentials for Salesforce, and they have to put in their credentials for Oracle. That's a choice I can make when I publish it. So that if on the back end their credentials return a different set of rows than someone else's, that's going to be completely governed through how I've done it and respected through the process. Those are the two ways we do it, but we don't have a column by column or masking capability yet. Okay, well, just one last thing I wanted to mention. If you're interested in Datapoint and you want to download the trial, or if you already have a license, I do have a kind of a handy tips and tricks guide, which we wrote ourselves in my group, and I'm happy to share that with anybody who send me an email at julie.hyman@software.dell.com, and I'll send that guide out to you, and then you'll have my email as well if any questions come up in the future. Love to hear from users, whether it's questions on how to do things or feedback on how we could do things better.
Okay, I want to thank you and Michael for the very informative presentation. This was great. This concludes today's event. Have a great day.